Hi everyone. In discussing Thomas Jefferson's legacy, I'd like first to touch on the concept of legacy itself. Because legacy is something more than historical remembrance. It's more than noting that Jefferson lived or even that he participated in the Revolution. A legacy is an act or a series of actions that defines a person and really characterizes how we perceive that person. So when we speak of a legacy for Thomas Jefferson, we're looking for something that defines how we perceive him and how we judge him. And it makes it difficult because Jefferson did a whole lot of different things, and he also failed to do a lot of different things. One particular area of focus for historians is his ownership of slaves, and especially his relationship with Sally Heming. This area is certainly one of controversy, and it's certainly an important part of his life. But I would argue it's not Jefferson's legacy. Jefferson was certainly a part of the American legacy of slavery, but we study Jefferson's slave ownership and his relationship with Sally because of something else. After all, there were many Virginia slave owners. There were many slave owners who fathered children with their slaves. So this doesn't make Jefferson unique, and it doesn't make his ownership controversial. What does is something else, and I think that something else is really codified on his tombstone, where it's written that he was the author of the Declaration of Independence and of the Statute of Virginia for Religious Freedom, and he was the father of the University of Virginia. These things, and kind of what they represent, I think can be boiled down to a single focus, and that focus is freedom. You have the political freedom, which is spoken of in the Declaration of Independence. And it is this idea that Jefferson writes down, that all men are created equal, and that the Creator has given men rights, one of them being liberty. It's this idea that makes his ownership of slaves controversial. And it's also what many in history, many politicians of many different nations have looked to his political writings as defining what a nation should stand for and a purpose of the government. And so that's part of his legacy. And this idea of freedom is also present in the Virginia Statute on Religious Freedom, where he is arguing that men should be able to worship God according to their conscience. And even education has as its focus freedom. Jefferson wrote a letter to George Wythe wherein he writes, "I think by far the most important bill in our whole code is that for the diffusion of knowledge among the people. No other sure foundation can be devised for the preservation of freedom and happiness." And so we have here this idea that even education itself is aimed at preserving freedom. And I think that this is the defining characteristic of Jefferson's life. It's not who he was as a whole person, but it's what we remember him for. And it really raises up an important problem with this idea of legacy. And that is that the legacy itself kind of overshadows the person. It makes the person more than perhaps he was, because we judge Jefferson against his idea of freedom and his ownership of slaves. We judge him and call him a hypocrite, perhaps. And that's because this legacy has raised Jefferson up. And another problem with legacy is that a lot of people want to cut it down. Several historians seek to pull down Jefferson and pull down the fathers, to destroy the American pantheon, if you will, to cut them down a notch. And certainly the legacy of these men and the legacy of Jefferson raised them up perhaps to more than what they were. But the legacy itself is important. And I think it makes me wonder how the historian should use that legacy. Can legacy itself have a purpose? Or is it merely the tombstone of the dead, there to remember but nothing more? And that's the question I've been wrestling with, and I wondered what your opinion was as well. How should the historian use the legacy of men like Jefferson? How should they present it? And does it serve a useful function in the education of Americans? Thank you for your time.